Welcome to Keys of the Kingdom. I'm Brother Gregory, and we're going to talk again about the Kingdom of God, which is what we're supposed to be seeking. Aren't we supposed to be seeking the Kingdom of God and His righteousness? And what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, we cover a lot of different topics, but we're always coming back to the gospel of the kingdom because it radically changed the thinking of many of the people at the time of Christ and throughout the ages. And there's a radical difference between the way Christ was saying to seek liberty under God, which is what the kingdom of God is. It's liberty under God. A quote, that's come up since the beginning that I began writing books, and it was around a long time before that, was C.C. DeMille's quote, "Are men the property of the state, or are they free souls under God?" Well, obviously at different times, different people are the property of the state, and they are not free souls under God, and they become the property of the state, which it would be like being merchandise, being possessions, being subjects of the state, comes about throughout history for a variety of reasons, but a certain spirit usually flows through a society where this takes place. And that's what Christ was talking about. That's what Moses was talking about. Moses freed people from the domination and bondage of Egypt. The Bible tells us never to go back to that bondage. Christ freed people also from that bondage, which was the Christian conflict, because some people didn't want to recognize that Christ had freed people from a similar bondage of that time. And he had done it not by fighting against or warring against, and of course Moses had done the same thing without fighting against or warring against any political regime. That's not the strategy of the radical nature of the gospel of the kingdom. The radical nature of the gospel of the kingdom operates much differently. Now, there are a lot of people who call themselves radicals today. Even Satan is called a radical by Saul Alinsky, who wrote the book, Rules for Radicals. And the idea is that we are being coached by either Christ or by the adversary of Christ, by somebody contrary to the ways of Christ. And that's what Christianity was called, the way. So I've added to a number of pages that we already had up, and I sometimes forget how many things that we do have available for people. You can go and read our page on ideological subversion, which is contained in that page is an article on Yuri Bezmenov, who was a Russian KGB officer who defected to the United States and was telling people in an interview how the KGB was planning to take over the United States, to ideologically subvert the United States. Well, he came up with these ideas. The KGB came up with these ideas. They've been around for a long time, and I just added this morning to our article on Rules for Radicals a little clip from a cartoon that was in the Chicago Tribune way back in 1934, which is kind of a synopsis in the cartoon of the strategy of the communists. A lot of people have adopted that strategy without ever even knowing the communists. They're not even thinking that they're communists, although many of them have thought of becoming a communist. Why does that appeal to them? Why does becoming a socialist appeal to people? And the reality is it's not just culture. It's not just what they learn from the outside. It has to do with the spirit that dwelleth in them. And, of course, Christ was talking about a spirit that dwelleth in you as well, and talks about cleaning up your house. And he has a number of rules for the radicals of Christianity, and he lays those rules out. And I actually just added those this morning, some of those rules, to the same page on Rules for Radicals. And the page starts out, it has this little cartoon. I always like to have some sort of graphics on the page so that if we share this on Facebook, you can see something that will show up as symbolizing that particular page. And so I added that cartoon as the imagery of that page. But the page begins to talk about a guy by the name of Saul David Alinsky. He was born in 1909, died in 1972, and wrote a book by the name of Rules for Radicals. And a number of things have been attributed to Saul Alinsky. And, he worked for the mafia, or at least mafia people, for a while. But he did do a lot of organizing, community organizing, and learned a lot about that, and had some success. And some of the things that he organized for to improve the situation of people was really a pretty good idea, because there was a lot of room for improvement, to say the least, because people were being abused by other people. And organizing yourselves in a way to combat that abuse of people in power or people in positions of money and influence, that's a good idea. But the way in which you organize, the spirit in which you organize, may bring about conditions and results and effects that will not be as validly freeing as Moses was when he freed the people from Egypt, or Christ was when he freed the people from the domination of men like Herod and the Pharisees, and some of the corruption, because there was a great deal of corruption in the government of Judea at the time of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ was just calling Jesus the Christ. It's calling him the King of Judea, because the word Christ means anointed. And if you were to say that in the Hebrew, it would be Meshiach. And Meshiach is the Hebrew word for anointed, and that would be the Messiah. By calling Jesus Christ, you're calling him the Messiah. If you're calling him the Messiah, you're saying that he is the rightful king, the highest son of David, another thing that Jesus was called, highest son of David, who was doing things that only the king could do. So what was Jesus doing that only the king could do? Well, he was firing the money changers. Who were the porters of the temple. Only David could do that. Actually, the high priest could do that. But then there's evidence that Jesus was the high priest as well. Now, a lot of people don't tell you that. That's one of those things, those pieces of knowledge that we like to share with you, so that you can begin to understand the wholeness of the gospel. Because Jesus was literally, at that particular time, outside of the biblical text, although there's some references that would lead us to believe this, inside the biblical text, there was upheavals going on. There was shenanigans going on in the political realm at that particular time. We know that from history. Herod really had no position to be king. Before that, you had other kings that came into power, and there was this vying for who was the rightful king. And then, of course, Herod divided the kingdom into three parts, and one part went to Philip, and one part went to Herod Antipas, his son, and another one went to a third son, who Herod eventually had executed because he accused him of trying to overthrow Herod himself. And so there was a lot of this intrigue going on in the government at that time. There were riots that are mentioned in the New Testament, had to do with an aqueduct that was put in, and the funds that were used to produce this public works of putting in the aqueduct to bring fresh water into Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was growing. It was growing because of the fact that the Romans were there, and Romans were investing in roads, investing in harbors, building cities like Caesarea, setting up temples, which is what they operated their social welfare system through. Herod was taking on many of the practices that had become popular in Rome, And those of you who have stuck with us and done some study on the matter understand that Rome had been a republic and had been transitioning from a republic to an indirect democracy, and then an imperial power with a commander-in-chief who was called the emperor, and a president of Rome who was called the Principes Civitas, who was the chief executive officer of Rome, and a Senate who could be called lawmakers. The Senate were just old men who people respected, but now they had become lawmakers and were making laws, and the citizens had become enfranchised, and there was a lot of stuff going on for those first 500 years of Rome, because for those first 500 years they were not an empire. They grew into that empire with, like we've mentioned before, Polybius said that because people were becoming accustomed to living at the expense of others, they were literally being changed. Their culture, the Roman culture, was being altered. And they were bringing in lots of other cultures. The Greek culture came in when they defeated the Greeks. The Celts were bringing a certain amount of their culture to Great Britain. And with that, a lot of knowledge. The Celts had a lot of knowledge of farming and agriculture, and that was coming in. So all these different things were coming into Rome, and Rome was usually figuring out how to make money with these learned knowledges and bits and pieces coming from culture. And I've added considerably to our page on culture, asking the question, does culture matter? What is culture? I mean, we talk about, multiculturalism. Well, culture itself is multi. I mean, it's a cumulative deposit of knowledge, experience, beliefs, values, attitudes, meanings, hierarchies, religion, notions of time, roles, spatial relationships, concepts of the universe, material objects, and possessions acquired by a group of people in the course of generations through individual and group striving. So that's one definition of culture, but that covers a lot of different things. So you had knowledge that the Greeks were bringing to Rome. You had knowledge that the Celts were bringing to Rome, that when, Rome conquered North Africa, they brought knowledge up from North Africa, and they also brought lots of other things, some of the medicines, some of the drugs, some of the practices. And, of course, the Greeks had acquired some cultural appropriation when they had fought the nations in the Far East. And so, Alexander the Great had gone around, and he picked up cultural things as well as he had picked up diseases from some of these places and brought them back and shared them with the other Greeks, which were now sharing some of these ideas and problems of culture with the Romans. And this was diluting their own culture. In some ways, it strengthened their culture, but it depends on what knowledge, what experience, what beliefs, what values, what attitudes you take from a particular culture. So multiculturalism can be good or it can be bad depending on what values you accept from that culture and take on as your own values. In some cultures, it's okay to rape. In some cultures, it's okay to oppress groups of people and enslave groups of people. People talk about the Bible promoting slavery. Somebody actually posted something about that late last night. I've been up most of the night because we're in the middle of lambing here, so that means we lose a lot of sleep. And I thought, the Bible does not promote slavery. It allows for servitude, but it puts all kinds of restrictions on that servitude. The Bible also allows divorce, but it does not promote divorce. It allows divorce, but it puts restrictions on that divorce. I mean, Jesus even says, Moses gave you divorce because of the hardness of your heart. not because God wanted you to have divorces. It was not that way from the beginning. So you misconstrue the Bible when it talks about slavery. It's not promoting slavery. And what it's actually promoting is servitude. Not promoting, but allowing is servitude. The same servitude that was allowed in the Old Testament of the Bible is absolutely legal today in the United States. Most of our laws dealing with employment come from Roman laws on slave-master relationships. Unemployment, that comes directly at, unemployment insurance comes directly out of slave-master laws in Rome. Those are ideas that come from that. You might not want to call employment slavery, but if you go read our article on employ versus enslave, and the reality is that there really was no slavery of any consequence in Egypt at the time of the Israelite bondage in Egypt. And the historians will tell you that. There was servitude, but that servitude was based on debt and inherited positions and taxation. If somebody can require, you have to give them the value of your labor. You don't get the value of your labor. Somebody else will get the value of your labor, whether it's 10% or 5% or 20% or 75%. You're a slave for that percent. You're working without pay for that percent. That's bondage. That's servitude. You don't want to call it slavery. You want to call it employment tax. But even income tax, another word for that in the Bible is tribute. And the Bible tells you that slothful shall be under tribute. And Jesus even tells you that if you owe the tax, you pay the tax. But if you don't understand the context of what he's saying in history, the context of the Bible and the person who was saying that the Bible promoted slavery, and it took us thousands of years, I can't remember what it was that he said, hundreds or centuries, for us to overcome the teachings of the Bible. You haven't learned the teachings of the Bible if you think that. You don't understand what you're talking about, because it's not promoting slavery. It's allowing servitude. As a matter of fact, it points out that you should not go out, and attack people for the purposes of enslaving them and then selling them as a slave for profit. You're not supposed to do that in the Bible. But that goes on every day today now, especially up in countries like Libya. That's all. The slave markets are open again in Libya since what did Hillary say? We came, we saw, we basically, she said conquered. I won't say what she actually said, but when they created this power vacuum in Libya, now there are people being enslaved, physically brutalized, slavery. Not servitude, slavery. And that's thanks to meddling by people who, that other people actually admire and want to make them president of the United States. Because they don't know what's going on. The facts don't seem to matter. People are very confused. I mean, another article that was, or story in the news is, two transgender women. That's what they call them. I always have trouble with this. They say, okay, they're transgender women. Is that women who think they're men or men who think they're women? Well, evidently, I kind of got it. A transgender woman, according to the news, is a man who wants everybody to think that he's a woman because he wants to identify as a woman. He actually is a man. He's a male. Biologically, he's a male. But he wants you to think and treat him as if he was a woman. Well, that's a delusion. He has what you call gender dysphoria. It was called gender dysphoria for years. He doesn't want to be identified as the male that he actually is biologically. And so now he's going and getting in races and others, other sports, wrestling, which, I'm just astounded that you're going to let this guy wrestle girls because he thinks he's a girl. Well, that means I should be able to rob banks because I think I'm rich. I go in there with a withdrawal slip. I would like to take $1 million out of my account. They say, well, you don't have an account. Yeah, I feel like I have an account. I think I have an account. I want to identify with rich people. But you don't want to give me my $1 million? How dare you attack my delusion? That's what they're doing. These guys have had male hormones secreting in their body since before they were born. And those male hormones have given them stronger bones, bigger muscles, stronger muscles, and bigger lungs, bigger organs than woman. But he wants to identify as a woman, so he's going to go out and compete as a woman against women. It's ridiculous. It's insane that you want to cater to his delusion. Now, here's a question. By catering to his delusion, are you doing him a favor or are you doing him an injury? Because, if they gave me $1 million at the bank, would that be a good thing or would that be a bad thing? Well, obviously you have to steal $1 million from somebody, because I don't really have $1 million in the bank, but I feel like I do. I want to identify as a millionaire, so, they should give me $1 million, right? No, absolutely not. And they should not treat him as a woman. If he wants to be called a girl, that's fine. You guys can work that out. But he isn't. He's a male, and he shouldn't be allowed to wrestle girls and beat them up and compete. What's going to happen to these guys who win these awards? Eventually, they're going to come to the realization that they're not really girls, and they've been trying to act like they're winners as women when they're not really women. And so it's going to be false accolades, counterfeit accolades that they're receiving. And then comes guilt. They're going to feel guilty about the fact that they beat these girls, sometimes out of scholarships. Some of those girls might have got scholarships, might have got into colleges of their choice because they were the winners. But now people are going to look at their scores and say, well, they weren't winners. These other two women were winners, because it doesn't actually say that they're women, that they're men proposing as women. So that they're out. So they're actually being put at a disadvantage to support the delusion of these guys who think they're women or want to identify as women. And they can do that. I'm fine with that if they want to identify with it.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188. 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
So welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom, and so we're going to look at some of the other delusions that people have. Obviously, these people who want to think, girls who want to think they're guys and guys who want to think they're girls, that's a delusion. They aren't really. They feel like it, they want to identify as it, and I understand that. And I don't think anybody should be mean to them, but I don't think it's being kind to them by supporting that delusion. You don't have to attack that delusion, but you don't have to support it. Certainly you don't have to support it at the cost of other people. The same as the bank can't actually give me $1 million even though I want to identify with a millionaire. I want to be treated as a millionaire, and I want to withdraw my money, my $1 million from their bank, even though I don't really have $1 million in the bank. I mean, that's, people say, oh, that's not the same thing. Well, yeah, it is. It is basically the same thing that you're doing. If I want to believe that I'm a brain surgeon, do I get to operate on your brain? Just because I believe that I would do you harm. I would injure you. I mean, you know that, right? That I'm not really a brain surgeon, but if I want to identify as one, and I put on, a white coat and, a stethoscope, and I get some scalpels and everything, and I say, well, I can fix your tumor in your brain. You're not going to let me do that, but you're going to let me wrestle your daughter because I think I'm a woman? It's insane. It's crazy. And you have a delusion that you're actually doing them good. You're not doing them good. So, talking about Saul Alinsky, and what Saul Alinsky did. The reason I got on this originally, this Saul Alinsky deal, is that somebody, and it's just gone kind of viral on the internet, has been publishing that Saul Alinsky wrote these 8 steps to socialism. And it appears here and there all over the place. He didn't write it. It's not his. And, you can do fact check with this on Snopes. Snopes will tell you that the claim that he wrote it is false. They have a little article, Beware of Useful Idiots, and they have a picture of Saul Alinsky there. And they quote somebody who says that Saul Alinsky wrote these 8 rules for turning a nation into a socialist state. He did not write them. And they're right to say that that's false. But the fact is, somebody wrote them, and that's not false. Somebody had these ideas for turning the nation into socialism. And the fact is before they wrote them down, other people had the same ideas. They called it something else. And on the page, we actually cover some of those other rules that were called. What Saul Alinsky did do, he organized a lot of people, like I say, to fight against injustices. But in 1970 or 71, I think, he wrote a book, Rules for Radicals. And he did dedicate that book to Lucifer, because he considered Lucifer, the first radical that, went against the establishment and ended up with his own domain, as if hell is his own private domain. Well, yeah, but it is hell. So he's got his own domain, but it's not necessarily a nice place to visit. It's hell. But he got it, and it's not really entirely. He's only got legal titles to that domain. Jesus can enter into hell, but Lucifer can't enter into heaven. So it's not quite the same as your own domain. It's not really all that sovereign there. When Christ comes to hell, Lucifer's not sovereign anymore. And if you would follow the ways of Christ, Lucifer won't be your sovereign either. But if you follow the ways of Lucifer, you may end up in hell. And that's one of the things that Saul Alinsky said in an interview shortly before he died, was that he was asked if he believed in hell. He was a religious guy. He was Jewish. And he stayed married to the same woman for years. I mean, his first wife died, I think. His second wife had some sort of mental and physical issues, and he wouldn't divorce her for years and years. And although they didn't live together, I mean, she was in hospitals and everything else. But he didn't believe in divorce because of his religious convictions. So, he has some, but this is, it's like culture. There are cultures that have good ideas and values, and there are cultures that don't have such good ideas and values. And actually, many cultures have a blend of both. And so, anyway, Saul Alinsky, finally, he got married to another woman. He stayed married to her till the day he died. And, but, I don't really know a great deal about his personal life. I never met him. I know that he was fighting for a lot of different people, but he also had some tactics that I would not consider exactly moral or Christ-like or even Mosaic. You want more Machiavellian. He wrote, "What follows is for those who want to change the world from what it is to what they believe it should be. The Prince was written by Machiavelli for the haves on how to hold power. Rules for Radicals is written for the have-nots on how to take it away." Well, I don't think that it is a good idea to want to take away power from other people. I think it's a good idea to obtain the power that God intended you to have to begin with, which is the right to exercise your rights as an individual, those inalienable rights. You want to get those rights back. People think, well, I have inalienable rights. You can't infringe upon them. Well, you can have inalienable rights infringed upon if you have a practice of infringing upon the rights of others. Then you will become subject. That's part of the cause and effect of the universe. If you think it's okay to live at the expense of others, then the universe you live in, the realm you live in, whether you call it heaven or utopia or hell or communist state, you become subject to that rule, that it's okay to live at your expense. See, as you judge, so shall ye be judged. So if you judge it's okay to live at the expense of others, others will get to live at your expense. And that's the right you obtain in that realm that you have created for yourself. And that's what hell is all about. And you have created the limitations of the world in which you live by limiting the rights of others. You want to be free again? Set others free from your own ambitions and desires and Machiavellian intent. What does it mean, this Machiavellian? Some of you may not know, but someone Machiavellian is sneaky, cunning, lacking moral code. The word comes from the Italian philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote a political treatise, The Prince, in the 1500s, that encourages the end justifies the means behavior, especially in politics. So the ends does not justify the means, despite what you think. The reality is the means will create the ends, and that's kind of my point from the beginning. The rules you follow, whether you call them rules for radicals or whatever, the way in which you approach the cultural values that you bring to the challenges of life will determine the outcome. The means determines the outcome. At the end of the book, he says, lest we forget, at least that this is his dedication, an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which. The first radical known to man, who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, was Lucifer. So, anyway, that's part of his acknowledgement, whether you want to call it dedication or whatever, that's his approach. But what did he actually write in the book? Now, he wrote this book, like I said, around 1970, and he died in 1972. I think maybe he published it in 1971. But there are basically 12 rules, and we're just going to take a brief look at them. I've got them outlined on the webpage. So, I have in the outline, there's the rule, common explanation of the rule, and then my comments from a kingdom point of view, which is why I've even brought up this subject. Well, his first rule is power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have, which sounds like something we come out of, I was trying to think of the Chinese battle tactician Hun Tzu comes up with these kinds of short little anecdotes to perception of virtue and reality and means by which to achieve your ultimate goals. But anyway, it's described as power is derived from different sources, which can include both money and people. Have-nots must build power from organizing, but the motivation is coming together may determine the true power. So the have-nots don't have money necessarily, at least not inexhaustible supplies of money. So they have to have this power by coming together, which is actually the facet of Rome, is this bundle of sticks where people come together and they bind themselves together, and then that makes that one stick can't be broken because it's bound together with all these other sticks. So that's the theory behind that. Well, the means by which you bind the people together may determine the nature and the spirit by which that facet operates. If you bind the people together with contracts and covenants and constitutions, then you're going to get a different outcome than if you bind the people together with love and compassion and honor, etc. And this is basic to understand. So he's not wrong in saying that, the power is not only the power they actually have, but there's an unseen power also that may be there as well. Well, if the power of you coming together is based on the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of the way, there will be an additional power there that will be unseen by your enemy, but it will be a very effective power. But anyway, from a kingdom point of view, I say the reason for coming together should be a matter of social virtue and morality for those bonds to convey true power to the people. Thinking of individuals or even groups as the enemy, in other words, judging others, your quest for power must have a noble goal of righteousness, bonds that come from conflict and common enemies are ineffective in areas that thrive on unity. So, the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Not really true. It's just giving you a certain reality of your enemy is fighting this guy, he's not fighting you. So it does not make the enemy of your enemy your friend. It's surely your friend, because as soon as he's done with your enemy, he's going to come after you. What should your loyalty really be to is righteousness, to those social virtues and morality. And the bonds that create those are faith, hope, and charity. So that's what Christ was doing, was binding the people together in a unit based on faith, hope, and charity, which requires things like forgiveness. But anyway, his rule 2 is never go outside the expertise of your people. In other words, if they're not good at something, let's not try that. But he says, the common explanation is it results in confusion, fear, and retreat. Feeling secure adds the backbone of anyone. Organizations under attack wonder why radicals don't address the real issues. This is why. They avoid things with which they have no knowledge. From a kingdom point of view, you should strive to become an expert in all elements within the world where conflict may occur. Doing your homework well requires that you are willing to know the whole truth and become a true expert addressing real problems in their entirety for all of society in the present and the future. In order to do that, you have to be willing to see yourself. There were problems in Chicago. I wouldn't even call them ghettos or slums, poor areas that people are actually buying their own homes. They were fixing up their homes. You can see pictures of Saul Alinsky organizing some of these people, and a lot of them worked in the slaughterhouses. They're actually doing pretty good. They were not being fairly treated. They organized and got better treatment, and that was a good thing. But if you look at the character of the people in the crowds, and I went through and I got photographs from the 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s of all these people who were following some of the Saul Alinsky rules, and they went from looking like clean-cut, hard-working, diligent people, husbands and wives and couples, healthy people, to being overweight, mostly women, a lot of weak men, and their health clearly went downhill. I mean, I don't know, their diets changed or whatever, but you just look at the photographs, just no words, just the photographs of the crowds that were gathering, and you see a huge transition in the character and in the faces of the people, as well as the health and well-being of the people. And they were hard-working, industrious people, not being well-treated, gathered together in order to get fair treatment, and it worked. But then people used the same tactics to do something else. What happened? Well, we'll get to that. What was actually going on? What spirit was coming in because of some of these ideas? Now, remember, this book, written by Saul Alinsky, was written long after most of the things that he accomplished. This is written in the 70s. And he had accepted certain ideas for organizing. And his livelihood, because he was a good organizer when there was really a need, people were using his ability to organize people to fight for things that were not necessarily quite as virtuous and as noble. But like I said, we'll get into that. So rule number 3, whenever possible, go outside the expertise of the enemy. Well, if you're considered the enemy, again, that expertise means that you have to look at the good and bad on both sides, including the side in which you're on. You have to be willing to see the truth about yourself. are you really don't you want to create them and us ideas or mentality? That's not going to be a good thing. It's not going to have a good outcome. What did Christ say you were supposed to be seeking? Righteousness. So you want to know what is righteous in relationship. If you're the employer and there's an employee who thinks that he's being mistreated, you want to look at it from his point of view. You also want to look at, are you mistreating him? Honestly question that. But vice versa goes also. If you're not admitting his role, and that's what I see a lot in the socialists today, is I think that all people who's entrepreneurs who start businesses are somehow taking advantage and exploiting other people. They don't. Most businesses, small businesses especially, are people struggling to make ends meet. They're risking everything. Sometimes their home, not just their business, all their capital, everything, working long, hard, arduous hours to make their business go, and they have a few employees. And if those employees are slacking off but still want to get paid, well, that's not right. You have to look at both sides and realize see them for the value that they are. So anyway, this idea of going outside of the expertise of the enemy, if you're honest and you're being honest, about yourself as well as others, that won't work against you. And this is what I see in a lot of the disputes we have. We talked about it in one of the last shows, was suddenly now it's okay, infanticide is okay. You can, if a baby survives an abortion, you can kill it by neglect. People go to jail because of that, but a doctor gets to do it. There was a girl who, I won't go into the whole story, but young girl concealed her pregnancy, was afraid to share the information with her parents and everything, had the baby alone, and went and laid it, I guess, on the doorstep of her neighbors, thought that they would find the baby, and they didn't find the baby in time, and the baby froze and died. And she went to jail for murder. But that's what is now legal in New York, and a lot of other places want to make that legal. There's a spirit getting into people that's allowing them to have the delusion that immorality is morality, that murder is mercy. This is why they throw gays off of buildings in Saudi Arabia, or I guess at least is it Iraq or Iran, I guess is where they were doing that, because they believe that they're being merciful. You see, murder becomes a mercy. Euthanasia will become a mercy. And euthanasia is practiced daily in America today. They have a very clever way of doing it, and they don't want to admit it because they're not willing to be experts at what they're doing. They don't want to see the truth about what they're doing. But it happens every day in America. In Europe, it's a real problem as well, more so, I think, in Europe. And anyway, so that was Rule 3. Rule 4, again, we're supposed to be striving for righteousness. That's the key element here. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to see the whole truth. So in number 4, make the enemy live up to his own book of rules. Good idea. Their idea is that if they have to reply to every letter, their plan was to write 30,000 letters and swamp them so they cannot do a good job. That's their intent. That was their plan. That's not good. You're trying to make them fail, like people trying to make Trump fail. They've switched 180 degrees off of what was supposedly their standards and their beliefs to make Trump fail, because that's really what their goal is. Their goal is never what's good for people. They just want to make, that, what do they call it, Trump derangement syndrome. Not that I advocate Trump. I advocate the kingdom. But you can see this bias in the media against the sitting president. And Christ warned you against doing that. The Old Testament warned you against that. You were to pray for the king, hope he did right, hope he was successful. You're not supposed to try to bring him down, certainly not by Machiavellian plots and plans. So while holding our opponents to their words, we should be, again, seeking that righteousness and doing so in as noble a way as possible, even bandaging his wounds, helping him, rather than trying to destroy him and bring him down. But anyway, number 5, ridicule is man's most potent weapon. Well, no, it's a tactic that was born in hell. It's the tactic of the proud and the wicked, and it is certainly not the tactics of Christ, who condemned the Pharisees for not attending to the weightier matters. So anyway, number 6, a good tactic is one your people enjoy. Well, unless, of course, they're sadistic. So, that is, what's making them happy may not be good. No, you have to have a different measurement of morality and social virtue. It may make them happy to do really bad things. And eventually, it will make them unhappy, because really bad things will come to them, because, as I said at the beginning, as you judge, so shall you be judged. Number 7, the tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. So he's talking about quick and decisive victories, which, if you're talking about real battles, that may be a good idea. But the reality is, Jesus was talking about striving and persevering, because, keeping the faith to the end. So these tactics are really Luciferian tactics, or can be construed that way. And of course, evil can appear at times to be good. So it's a mix of things. So that you take a look at these, but really what we want to get into is the tactics of Christ. He says in number 8, keep the pressure on, never let up. Well, that's the perseverance. But again, he's making an opponent of the other side, rather than trying to convert both sides to righteousness. He's not a peacemaker. He's trying to create rebellion and cause one side to fail. Unfortunately, if that's your goal, to make somebody in your community fail, then that's what you judge. And as you judge, so shall you be judged. So there's only a couple more rules here. We'll look at them in the next show, and then we'll get on to the really good stuff.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.